Hello, and welcome to the International Advertising Association's Fireside Chat series on advertising law and public policy. I am here with Raelene Martin, who I guess is going to pop up on the screen momentarily, along with our fireplace. Hi, Raelene. And,
Hello, Jeff.
and we are here to talk to you about environmental issues. This is part of a series that the IAA is doing of Fireside Chats, where we look at important, evolving advertising and public policy issues around the world and think about them in the context of how these rules get developed and how you create a regulatory and self-regulatory scheme that is better and smarter through collaboration and input. I mean, at the end of the day, IAA believes that protecting consumers and creating a regulatory environment where businesses can thrive are really work hand in hand together and are not mutually exclusive by any means. But then in order to do that, it's critically important that there be this kind of collaboration and communication about the issues that are important. We've done, covered a wide variety of topics over the last year and a half, and I'm very, very excited to be here with Raelene. Raelene is the head of sustainability for the International Chamber of Commerce. She leads the ICC's work on sustainability policy. And interestingly, she also manages the ICC's Marketing and Advertising Commission as well. And, I'm probably going to have to ask her to come back and talk to us about the advertising code, because it is also an extraordinarily interesting and widely influential code, which I would love to talk to her about as well. But what we are here to talk about today is the ICC's new framework for responsible environmental marketing communications. And I know in a green marketing seminar, you would say, oh my God, you printed it out. Why isn't it on your computer? And the reason is not because I'm old, though that's probably part of it, but it's because it is so important and so valuable. And I refer to it so often that I have to have it actually next to me so I can look at it while I'm talking to people on video calls. So, but before we get into the guidance, let's sort of set the stage a little bit. First of all, again, thanks really for being here. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what the role of the ICC is and give people who are not as familiar with the ICC's work sort of who the ICC is, what it does, and sort of how it kind of works.
Sure, and thank you so much, Jeff. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and a huge thank you to IAA for the invitation. Very happy to be here on behalf of ICC and share some perspectives on the work that we've been doing. And so in terms of ICC and some general background, we really are the World Business Organization and representing at least 45 million businesses across the globe in over 100 countries. So that's quite significant, representing global multinational corporations, SMEs, as well as chambers all over the world. So I think that's quite significant in terms of a representation. And our key mission and goal is really to make trade work for everyone, every day, everywhere. And we do that in a number of different ways, including advocacy, policy advocacy, developing guidelines and standards. We also have dispute resolution services. And we use all of those methods to channel our activities really to promote trade and inclusive growth and prosperity. And ICC does have quite a key role in terms of working with key international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the UN, to deliver business perspectives to help shape international policy making. So I'm very excited to be with you today and maybe talk a little bit more about how we do that more concretely with respect to very generally the ICC code and more specifically on the environmental framework.
So how do the ICC codes that the ICC issues sort of fit into the work of the ICC?
Sure. So as I may have touched upon, we have a number of different streams of or pillars of what ICC does, and standard setting and rules development is actually one of the key pillars of what ICC does. And we've actually become quite influential in that space and are known for a number of different standards that ICC develops. One of those being the ICC Marketing Code that you may be aware has been in existence for over 80 years already, first created in 1937, and has really become established as the international gold standard or reference for global best practice. We also have other rules such as the Incoterms rules that are used quite broadly for transport. We have the banking UCP rules. I think ICC has become quite well known and influential in that space. And so what we do in terms of developing codes is quite significant because we have the ability to be able to draw from our membership expertise from many different sectors, many different businesses across the globe. And we do so in the context of specific policy commissions that ICC has established. So we have 3 departments, so to speak, within ICC. We have the Court of Arbitration and Dispute Resolution. We have World Chambers Federation, but then we have the policy department that really is the heart of the organization, so to speak, in terms of what we address. And in the department, we have, I think, 12 different policy commissions that address key issues, such as banking, commercial law and practice, digital economy, environment and energy, and marketing and advertising is one of those 12 commissions. And so I'm very happy to maybe share a bit more about how we do that.
Yeah, I would love. I think that would be great. So you've got this commission, and how does the commission develop policies? Like, where does the input come from? What's the process look like?
Sure. So in each commission we have member experts. I think in our commissions we have well over 3,000 experts in the commissions who actually contribute to our work. And in doing so, we really try and ensure that we have a global, holistic approach to developing these guides. And so, for example, for the ICC Marketing Code or the Environmental Framework, we bring together all the experts within our commission who have expertise in specific areas. And so in particular, on the Environmental Marketing Framework, we were able to draw expertise from 2 commissions. So it was a cross-cutting issue. We had experts from the Marketing and Advertising Commission, as well as experts from the Environment and Energy Commission, because it's quite a cross-cutting issue. And we're able to draw from their expertise in trying to examine the different ways of substantiating claims, how to address those, the different standards that are available, the approaches that businesses take, and how we could find some common ground in articulating that in a way that people could understand, and in a way that could be succinctly clear for people to apply in practice. And so the process in doing that is actually quite an extended process, because we want to make sure that we go through a full consultation. And so when we do that, we have several working group calls to go through specific areas of the document we'd like to address. And once we have a sufficiently stable document that we feel brings together the collective views of the experts in the group, we circulate that within the working group and the broader commissions and all of ICC's national committees across the globe, to review the document and provide additional input, just in case there may be some local context that we may need to take into account, or international developments. And we do that at least 2 or 3 times to make sure that we revise it and ensure that it takes into account the broad perspective that our community provides, and then come up with a final document that needs to be approved by ICC's executive board before we can release it. So sometimes that process can take anything between 1 year to 2 years to do.
So how did you guys get? I mean, one of the things that's fascinating to me about the sort of the environmental framework is that, green issues are particularly hot right now. No pun intended, I guess. And governments and self-regulation around the world are all scrambling to look at their laws and their rules and their guidance and update them. And somehow you guys figured this out 2 years ago and got ahead of the curve and recognized this and sort of, issued this guidance. What was going on that led you to go, oh, we need to do this now, and get this out? Because, certainly ICC is leading the conversation on this front at this moment.
Sure. Actually, we've had the environmental framework in existence since, I think, 2011 already, and we've generally updated it to align with changes to the ICC Marketing Code. But it's true, 2 years ago, we really did have a sense that there was a proliferation of environmental marketing claims, and a lot of interest by a number of different stakeholders, whether it was governments, regulators, consumers, businesses as well, in terms of environmental marketing, the impact that products have on the environment, and also businesses wanting to advertise the legitimate environmental benefits of their products. But of course, with the proliferation of environmental marketing claims, there was some concern around greenwashing and whether some of those claims were actually substantiated, whether they were not misleading. And so we thought, given the not only proliferation of environmental claims, there were also new emerging claims coming into the marketplace that we had not seen before, that we've been seeing a lot more recently, particularly, I think, as we've seen a lot more climate action globally. We've seen a lot of aspirational claims and commitments around carbon neutral, net zero. We've also seen a lot of free of claims, because I think there's a lot of concern, and consumers, when they purchase their products, they're a little bit more concerned about the environmental footprint of the products they purchase. So we thought that addressing some of those emerging claims would be quite useful to provide marketers with a guide as to how to address those when they are looking to advertise environmental benefits of their products, but do so in a way that is truthful and not misleading, but also help support the self-regulatory system to address a lot of these claims that are emerging in the market. So we had to take them and kind of group them, because it's true there are quite a few that we needed to address, and we grouped them in different sections and tried to address them individually and provide a little bit more guidance that builds on what we already have in the environmental marketing code. Sorry, in the marketing code under Chapter D on environmental marketing communications, and then lead into more specific guidance in the environmental marketing framework.
One of the difficulties, I guess, about being an international organization and having stakeholders around the world, and thinking about how to give guidance to countries who are in very, very different places. How does harmonization, come into play here? In other words, if the US is approaching something in one way and France or the EU is approaching something in a different way, how do you reconcile that when coming up with it? Do you just sort of go, well, we're going to come up with the guidance that we think is the right guidance, and it may be wrong for different countries, but that's the way we do it? Or do you try to look at and say, we want to try to come up with something that's going to work in a real cross-border sense?
That's an interesting question, because this is something that really warranted some robust discussions within the working group. And there were a lot of reflections upon existing standards, upon existing work that was done in the area. So of course we have the FTC Green Guides, we have the ISO standards, we also have some work done by the UK Competition and Market Authority. And there were questions as to whether we needed to reference existing standards and use those as a base. But generally, given the discussion that there isn't harmonization globally on the use of the different standards, we decided that principles-based approach would probably be preferable. And we've made reference to some of the existing standards, such as ISO, for example, or FTC or others. But I think the basic premise that we've gone with in this framework to make sure that it's flexible for use internationally is really a principles-based approach that focuses on some key rules of the road that we refer to make sure that environmental marketing claims are truthful and not misleading, that they are substantiated by a reasonable basis, that they're qualified to prevent deception, and really clear as to the benefits of the products that they market.
So, and I would love to talk about that for a second before we get into the specifics, which is, I think that regulators or people thinking about setting standards, think about these rules in the context of an assumption that these types of claims, even claims that are not outright false, saying something's made of recycled material when it's not, but more like, hey, this has benefits, that these kinds of claims do have a high capacity to mislead consumers, that greenwashing is real, and that consumers really do still have that greenwashing is real, and that consumers are likely to be misled by these types of claims unless they're really specific. And when I think about the Green Guides issued in 2009, 2010, I think that they operated on the assumption that consumers can easily be misled in this area. So it's very, very important to be specific. And, one of the things that was on my mind as we're waiting for the FTC to issue new Green Guides is whether the FTC is going to say, hey, over the last decade, consumers have become more sophisticated and are better able to process these claims. And we're not as concerned about these types of issues because we think consumers are better able to process what this information means. But when I look at sort of the recent revisions to the framework, it doesn't sound to me like you think that consumers are better able to process these claims. It seems like greenwashing is still a real concern.
I would agree with you, Jeff, and particularly because there's all of these new claims that consumers might not fully understand. If you have a product that says carbon neutral, if you have a product that says good for the environment, what does that actually mean? And consumers don't have a full understanding of what those claims mean. And I think the main tenet of the IC marketing code more generally is to really build consumer trust through responsible marketing. And of course, we'd be fully supportive of marketers advertising the legitimate benefits of their products, but to really warn against vague, unsubstantiated claims such as good for the environment, environmentally friendly, that really don't have substance behind it. And what we really want to encourage marketers to do is ensure that when they make claims that they have the evidence to be able to back it up, so to speak. And I think in so doing, that would really help build consumer confidence, because at the moment with greenwashing, there is a risk that you would undermine consumer confidence and also end up penalizing those marketers that do abide by the rules. And I think it's important for the industry as a whole to show a sense of responsibility. And when they do consider making those claims, do so in a way that really demonstrates that what we are putting forward, or what we're putting out there, has been supported by sufficient scientific evidence, is being able to be backed up. And if it is aspirational claims, for example, that they can demonstrate how to get there. And I think that in itself will demonstrate that the industry is showing some level of responsibility. But if we just go out there and make very vague, unwarranted claims, I think that could be quite dangerous and would probably have a risk for more regulation.
Well, so maybe let's talk about general environmental benefit claims for a second. Then, so I mean, when we talk about general environmental benefit claims, we're talking about things like environmentally friendly, or green, or sustainable, or ecologically safe, or something like that. And I think that the ICC guidelines basically say that, which is similar to the FTC guides, that don't really want people to make general unqualified claims, because they potentially either imply a broader range of environmental benefits than can be substantiated, or maybe communicate a claim that the product has no adverse impact on the environment. Sure. And so the guidance, I think, from ICC, which is consistent certainly with the guidance in the US, is don't make a claim like this unless you really could demonstrate that that's the case, which is really never going to be the case. And I think that one of the things that was very, very interesting to me, which the ICC revisions took on, which the FTC did not take on 10 years ago, was the use of the word sustainable. And probably the claim that maybe 10 years ago everyone was calling their products green. Today everyone's calling their products sustainable. And I think that the ICC takes on this issue a little bit. And I think that, I think the ICC sees sustainable not as some sort of aspirational claim or puffery or something like that, but sees it as a general environmental benefit claim, which has the potential to be misleading.
Yeah, that's exactly true. And sometimes companies may have general claims that may give the indication that it involves, some social economic impact beyond the environmental impacts of the products, such as, for example, working conditions, diversity and inclusion, etc. And we do try and provide a little bit more guidance in that area. And it was another topic that I think warranted some debate within the commission, within the working group, and some of the experts that we have. And really, a specific claim about individual environmental attributes should be, as usual, supported by reliable evidence and be linked to any claims of sustainability. And I think we try and avoid any general term around sustainability, and really want to be a little bit more specific in terms of what that means, because I think people have a different understanding of what sustainability means. Is it a sustainable product? Is it sustainable packaging? Is it sustainable for the environment more broadly? And I think people can get lost in that term. So we try and avoid it to the degree possible, particularly if some evidence would be needed to substantiate that.
It sounds like, though, that the ICC felt that you could qualify a sustainable claim, meaning you could say that this product is sustainable because it's made from recycled packaging.
Yeah, I think in some instances, for example, products that are sustainable because they're made of 100% recycled content or are recyclable can be justified, but there needs to be the qualifier. And I think just generally saying a product is sustainable is not sufficient.
So So I think if sustainable was the first thing that jumped out at me that marketers are looking at and going, this is an issue that they're going to have to reckon with. It seems like the second issue, and the FTC kind of hinted at this issue when it revised its guides a decade ago or 12 years ago, whatever it was. And I think that you took it on a little bit more directly, which is the connection between making an environmental claim and a life cycle analysis. And the sort of the question of, I want to promote my product as being made of 100% recycled material. Is that enough? Can I promote an individual environmental benefit, standing alone without really fully understanding whether as a whole it provides a net benefit to the environment?
Exactly. And ICC has made it clear, I think nowhere in our ICC framework or guides do we give the implication that a full life cycle analysis is needed for every single environmental claim. I think only unqualified, unsubstantiated environmental claims that really refer to the full life cycle of a product may warrant a full life cycle analysis. But in general, I think marketers really refer to more single attribute claims, and focusing on those more specifically is the direction that we would take. But I think we've also seen some developments, even in the EU, looking towards full life cycle analysis for all environmental claims, which could be quite problematic and could be quite expensive, I can imagine, for businesses. But in the ICC guides, we don't supply any requirements for full life cycle analysis for every single kind of environmental claim.
One of the interesting things about individual environmental claims, made of recycled material or recyclable or whatever, is that many of these claims are based on an assumption, unclear how fully it's been tested, that there truly is an environmental benefit, right? We've just made it, we've accepted that if you're over 13, you can collect private information from kids, right? Regardless of whether that's good or not. And we've kind of accepted that there are like certain principles that if this offers this benefit, it is in fact a benefit. And interestingly, ICC raised a particular issue in its guidance about, kind of these superiority comparative claims where you're offering a benefit. And I think the example you gave was exclusively available online. And, which is that there's a basic assumption that, it's better to view this document online. It's viewed to, do this service online versus in person or in paper or something like that, because digital is always going to be better than physical. And the ICC asked the question, well, if you're going to say that, you actually have to have some substantiation that it is truly better for the environment. And I thought that was really interesting that you took on that issue, because I think in many ways, it applies to a lot of the ways in which we think about these individual environmental benefits.
Definitely. And I think when it comes to comparative environmental claims, there also needs to be the clarity as to whether the comparison is between a previous version of a product as opposed to a comparison with competitors' product. And there needs to be a comparison like for like. And I think that needs to be quite clear, and particularly the aspects that are being referred to. And also, we find some cases where there may be references to the exclusion of a particular element in the product free of, but it probably wasn't free of that chemical before. And I think there also needs to be particular attention to the fact that if you do include references to free up particular elements in a product, that there isn't a substitute in there that has the same environmental impact than the previous one. And so I think that could be a danger that marketers could fall into, and could probably be misleading for consumers as well, who may think it's probably better for the environment because it does not contain one particular chemical or element, but it does contain a substitute that has a similar impact on the environment.
Right. So even if a life cycle analysis isn't necessarily required, right, when you're sort of looking at these issues, it's important to understand them in a larger context and go, is there really a benefit being offered here?
Of course.
So another issue that I thought was very, very interesting in the guidance was, how do you qualify green claims, right? And I think that, particularly, so many environmental marketing claims are made on packaging or in places where there's only limited space to do it. And the guidelines talked about, whether you could qualify the claims using the internet, right? And this is one of the big questions. I think marketers hate disclosures. They hate trying to fit all this stuff in an ad or in packaging, and they often ask the question, can't they just send people to a website to get more information? And the guidance in the US has traditionally been, if you mislead somebody in an ad, or on pack, you can't fix it later on, and you can't expect somebody to go somewhere else to do something. And that view hasn't really changed much in the last decades. Though, in the FTC, in the Green Guides, they opened the door a little bit to it. And it seems like you opened the door a little bit to it too, which is that you can't really necessarily use the internet to qualify your claims. But if you provide people in areas where it's complicated, if you communicate some level of communication, there may be a role for the internet to provide fuller details.
Exactly. I think the qualifier would really be that you probably need on the packaging. For example, you could have recyclable in certain regions or jurisdictions or certain areas or communities. And then after that, have further information of where those communities could be found, and that's online. But in terms of the qualifier, I think there would need to be some reference, at least on the packaging, that refers to where that is possible, and further details could be available for consumers to check online, and not assume that leaving all the information online, because not all consumers are going to go and check, would relieve marketers from including that. I think there still needs to be some level of qualification that directs them in the areas of where they need to go.
Makes sense. So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to, the framework had some very, very interesting things to say about kind of two very related issues. One is sort of non-traditional advertising communications that are more corporate communications, a company's general statements about environmental policy and things like that. And then second, this sort of the widespread use of aspirational claims, and how aspirational claims, what they mean, what they communicate, how they need to be substantiated. So I guess one question, and this is a question that comes up a lot, I think, for marketers, is, how should they think about their corporate communications when a company creates, a policy about its vision for the future? Is that advertising? Should they be thinking about that in the same way as they do the other kinds of marketing communications?
I think some general considerations do need to be taken into account, particularly given the direction that I think all stakeholders and businesses are taking. Of course, I think we're finding a lot more regularly that companies are expected to provide sustainability or environment reports, and that's doesn't really constitute advertising per se. But where there's a communication externally to the public that communicates some of the aspirational elements of the direction that businesses are wanting to go, I think that is specifically indicated in our guidance and refers to that as aspirational claims. So we have seen a number of new claims coming into the marketplace by businesses, such as net zero by 2050, carbon neutral by such and such a date. And being able to say that is one thing, but what we've asked for in the guidance is that when companies do make those kind of claims, they need to demonstrate how they plan on actually getting there, and have a methodological approach to actually achieve that. I think it could be quite easy in terms of trying to advertise or show that your company is forward thinking in terms of climate objectives, but it's one thing to have a date in mind, it's quite another to have a plan of how you intend to get there. So we really are realigning or reiterating that need for responsibility, that when you do make those kind of statements, or what we term the aspirational claims, that those businesses should be able to demonstrate how they plan or how they intend to get there.
How specific do you think how specific do you think that plan needs to be? In other words, I think one of the things that companies struggle with is, there's the resources for recycling are not available yet, or the technology is not available yet, or the things haven't been built yet, but that, with enough time, we're going to figure it out and get there. How much certainty do you think companies need to have before making that type of aspirational claim?
I would say quite a fair degree of certainty, because if you're going to say net zero by 2050, you can't just go blindly and assume that, oh, we'll figure it out on our way, and before you know it, 2050 is here and you've done nothing. So I think it's important that they have some kind of a strategic plan that shows we're going to reduce the use of, I don't know, plastics in our organization, or we're going to, our carbon emissions will be reduced by reducing flights by corporates in the organization by 50% over a certain number of years. So I think there needs to be clear indicators. Of course, we're not asking them to have a detailed report, but at least an indication of how they plan to get there, with some methods of achieving that, without just going in blindly and making a statement without any idea of how to get there.
So, one of the big claims, and you've mentioned this already, is kind of carbon net zero or carbon neutral. And what does that mean? And I would love to talk about this for a second, because this is certainly one of those issues that's coming up a lot. And, just to take a detour, right? If you claim that your product is made with renewable energy, in almost all cases, it's not actually made with renewable energy. You've just purchased renewable energy certificates to qualify for it as renewable energy. I always like to say that it's one of those places where, regulators have authorized companies to make a false claim because there's no other way to do it, right? Like, it's like, well, it's true, you don't actually have a windmill attached to your factory, but we're just going to treat that recycled and that renewable energy is coming to you, even though we don't know whether it is or not. And I think that as people think about carbon neutral claims, they're asking the same question, which is, what does a carbon neutral claim mean? And I think that this is a really, really important issue, which is, is it enough? Can you claim that your product is carbon neutral if you're just buying offsets, or does the product itself actually have to be carbon neutral?
That's a very interesting one. And as ICC, we tried not to take a stance in terms of, I think judgment might be a strong word, as to whether the product itself should be carbon neutral or not. But we do understand that there've been quite a number of claims coming out regarding carbon neutrality. And really, carbon neutral claims are understood to mean that the net carbon footprint is zero. But of course, in many cases, some of those zero carbon contributions can really only be achieved using offsets, removals, or credits. And so the science of doing that or calculating that is still evolving. And what we have specified in the ICC guidance is really recommending that marketers who make those kind of claims, including advertising commitments, should be clear and include the qualifiers as needed regarding the method that they use, the basis, the time frame relied upon for such commitments. And if there are references to offsets, I think there should be steps taken through emissions reduction or compensation that are clearly distinguished. And we also assure that marketers should take care when adopting those claims to make sure that they're defined with substantiating data, and also understanding that there may be differences in different jurisdictions as to what is understood by some of these claims. So I think what may be understood in France might be different as to what's understood in the US, for example. But I think the essential for us is really being able to have the substantiating data, and if offsets are being used, that there is some reference to it, but not really drawing the line as to whether it should only reference the product or not, because we fully understand that in some instances, it's only possible to get to net zero through removals, offsets, or credits.
Well, and I think that there's a really important principle here, which is that, people want this sort of clear answer to, what does this claim mean? How are consumers going to interpret this claim? And the truth is for a lot of these, we don't really know. And consumer understanding is evolving and the technology is evolving. And it seems like your guidance here, which is, which it seems consistent with certainly at least the FTC's guidance from way back, was that, when you're talking about these types of emerging claims, it's important to explain what they mean, right? If you're saying it's carbon neutral, say it's carbon neutral and then tell people what that means, which is that we bought offsets to, we're planting a forest to offset the carbon that we're emitting from this thing, and to sort of do that. And I think this goes to the next topic that I wanted to mention, which is another important emerging claim, which is circularity.
Yes, a very green area at the moment. Go ahead, Jeff.
You want to talk a little bit about what circularity is and how you guys thought through how to approach that issue?
We did have several discussions around this, and I know there's been a lot of developments in this area, but there certainly isn't a widely understood definition, accepted definition of circularity and the steps to achieve it. I think in general terms, though, it really is around reducing or eliminating waste and pollution and the climate impact, and being able to circulate products in the economy. And so with the understanding that there are no accepted definitions or standards or global agreement on those standards in connection with claims around circularity, we've really just provided general guidance that these should be based on an appropriate assessment, and marketers should make clear what is meant by the claim and disclose the basis for that claim. And we certainly see this as an emerging area, and hope that in the next year or two, there'll be a little bit more clarity as to what circular means. And there've been a lot of developments, I think, within the UN, within the EU as well. And I know the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been doing quite a lot of work on the circular economy as well. And there may be a convergence towards more general understanding of what that term means. But I think at the moment, there isn't harmonized standards, so to speak, in terms of what circularity means. So we've provided some guidance in terms of what that could refer to, and have really just emphasized the need to have an appropriate assessment and to disclose the basis for any claims around circularity. So there's different terms. It could be circular, circularity, circular economy. There's a lot of terms around that kind of concept.
One of the topics that the framework and the ICC, I think, thought about, and that it's one of these that has been a continuing area of discussion, is the tension between the scientific, the theoretical scientific nature of what could be accomplished versus what is actually happening out there in the marketplace. And I mean, the example would be like a degradability claim, right? Which is, there's all kinds of products that are theoretically degradable, right? If you fill up your trash bag with trash and you put it in your backyard and you leave it there for 6 months, it will biodegrade, right? Because the technology is available, but that the way we throw things away, they're in a landfill and they're not going to degrade. And I think that the guidance that the ICC gives, which is not really a big change, is just simply don't make a biodegradability claim if the thing's not actually going to degrade in accordance with normal use and expectations. But I think from a policy perspective, what do we do about, or how does the ICC sort of deal with this conflict between wanting companies to develop this technology and wanting companies to evolve in offering these environmental benefits, even if the infrastructure hasn't caught up yet? The example of the product that is recyclable, but facilities don't accept it yet for recycling. Like, we want them to do it so that when we can do it, it will work, but that we won't let them talk about it until you get there. Like, how do you deal with wanting to try to encourage companies to invest and to be ready for the future, but we don't let them talk about it now?
No, I understand where you're coming from, and certainly when it comes to degradability claims, just to confirm what you're saying, in the ICC guidance, we really say that these really should not be made unless the marketer has reliable evidence that the product or packaging will degrade in all potential disposable environments. And there is that difficulty of establish whether a product or package will degrade in sanitary landfill, and also a lot of the common disposable methods. And what we've tried to identify specifically when it comes to this area of responsibility is that a degradability claim should not be framed as to incite or condone littering. And so
I thought that was really interesting. I thought that ICC raised the issue of we're not saying you can't say that if it's thrown away improperly, it'll degrade, but you have to be careful about that, which I thought was great.
Exactly. So we really do say that marketers should, nevertheless encourage consumers to dispose of the product or packaging responsibly. So you could include wording around please dispose of responsibly or do not litter, to ensure or also establish that, the degradability attributes of the product will not be harmful, and to encourage that level of responsibility as well.
I have to say, it would be really fun to see somebody like a soft drink manufacturer do an advertising campaign about their recyclable, cans or biodegradable cans, and like on a camping trip, and just like feel free to throw it in the woods. It'll be gone after 6 months. Like I would just love to see the challenges around that one.
There, of course, needs to be the balance between the two, between degradability and also responsibility in terms of disposal.
I like to see Guy Parker deal with that case. I think that would be really funny. I'm going to totally do that campaign for a conference. I think that is such a funny fake advertising campaign.
Pull me up for that one when you do.
Definitely. So one of the things I just want to mention for people, but maybe we don't need to spend much time on it, is that one of the nice things about the ICC environmental framework is you talk about some claims that are emerging claims that need some guidance that where you can't find somewhere else, where you talk about design for disassembly, you talk about recovered energy, you're talking about these issues that are the sort of emerging claims and help them think them through, even if you can't find them in the green guides. And I thought that they would, was extraordinarily helpful. But as we, on the recycled content claim, one of the issues that people have struggled with over the green guides is in the US is there's sort of a principle that you can't say something is made of recycled content if unless the content would have entered the waste stream, right? So if something goes and is post-consumer content and you stick it back in, great. If something would have otherwise been disposed of, then it could be recycled content and you could put it back in. But one of the things the ICC notes is the fact that the question of kind of pre-consumer content and how pre-consumer content is treated, isn't really being dealt with consistently around the world. And I guess I was wondering, does the ICC have a view about this issue? And the reason I think this is such an interesting one is the way the FTC approaches it, in my view, seems to both be, philosophically sound, but seems to penalize environmentally preferable behavior, right? Which is like, well, if you throw something away, you can then treat it as recycled content. But if you incorporate it back into your manufacturing process, maybe it's recycled for a little while, but once it becomes your standard process, you can't promote it as being recycled anymore. And you create this kind of problem where it's almost as if developing a better internal process to use pre-consumer material, is a disincentive to creating a better environmental process, but you can't talk about it. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's true. When we develop the guidance, we try to find I wouldn't call it a happy balance, but at least a balance that incorporated different views and approaches. And of course, I think one of the underlying elements of our guidance is to ensure that marketers do take into account any local legal requirements and apply those, and the self-regulatory elements would fall above and beyond what has been set out by legal requirements. And so when it comes to recycled content, I think the guides do provide some very helpful steps of how to approach that. And what I would like to also signal is in addition to the environmental framework, which is really structured in terms of a chart with references to the ICC code guidance and then some key considerations, we do have an annex at the end of the framework that really outlines some specific steps or questions that marketers should ask themselves when they're making when they could be making claims, and the next steps that they could take. And we found some very positive feedback in response to that particular annex or checklist, so to speak, that really takes marketers through those steps, particularly when they're not clear as to the process that they should take.
So maybe speaking of not being clear about the process they should take, maybe the last sort of specific kind of terminology I'd love to talk about for a second is kind of the use of renewable. And, I think consumers, when they talk about renewable material, they often struggle with how do you determine whether certain material is renewable or not, right? When I see a claim that says, our 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 product is made from renewable material because it's made from trees. I kind of raise an eye, if I could raise an eyebrow, like I kind of raise an eyebrow and go, well, how are you interpreting renewable here? And I think that you kind of raise that question as well, which is it sort of seems like there's some biological material that grows at such a fast rate that we can't we use it as fast as we can regrow it, so it's not really an issue. But that with renewable material that's not renewing at the same rate, you know either you shouldn't be making it sounds like what the ICC is saying is you either shouldn't be making that claim or you should really explain to people the context.
Yeah, exactly. So if I could maybe provide a little bit more insight on that, in our guidance, really consider material to be renewable if that resource is managed to assure that it won't be depleted. So really replenished at a rate that's equal to or greater than its depletion. And an unqualified claim of renewability should not be made unless the product or package consists of 100% renewable content and excludes minor incidental components. And so really there should be qualifications that reference the percentage of renewable materials as compared to the total mass if that threshold is not met. And so there are some examples, for example, while crops such as corn are understood to grow annually and trees probably take a longer period for which to grow, reference to the time frame could be quite helpful in terms of the product and that it may be renewable, and that may be appropriate to consumers that may not understand the time frame at which the resource is replenished.
So on the renewable point, the when talking about renewable energy, it seems that there's a consistency in terms of the way we've been thinking about these issues. But one of the issues that one of the approaches that the FTC took in the Green Guides, which the ICC is continuing with as well, is that when talking about making a product with renewable energy, that it's helpful to specify what that renewable energy is.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's important for consumers to understand what the renewable energy is that they're talking about?
I must say that this is actually one that's quite difficult for consumers as well as even businesses to understand fully, because I think electricity can be derived from sources that are constantly replenished. And you may have situations where, for example, the electricity derived or generated from renewable energy sources is indistinguishable from that which is from conventional sources. And so within our particular guidance, claims about the use of renewable energy or power should be substantiated through what we've termed contracts with electrical utilities, renewable certificates. I think they call them renewable energy certificates, or similar mechanisms that prevent double counting. And then we also specify that there should be no express or implied claim that a product was manufactured or serviced with renewable energy should be made unless 100% of that energy use or product can be traced to the renewable energy source. And so qualifiers really should be used in that case, and marketers may reduce the risk that consumers will be misled as the type of renewable energy by including that information in the claim.
So I see the framework takes on a lot of issues and covers a lot of new ground. What didn't you take on? Were there any big issues where like this is too new, this is too difficult, we don't want to address it here, we'll deal with it in the future?
We addressed, it's true, the list that we provided in the framework is not exhaustive, and there's probably different ways of framing some of the claims we've addressed. But to the degree possible, we did try to address the majority of claims we've been seeing in the marketplace. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some areas that I think that are evolving quite quickly and have not are not sufficiently established in the marketplace just yet, that we'll probably see evolving a bit more, and that includes circularity. And also the concept of, I think what they term upcycling and downcycling. And that's probably going to be something, we haven't addressed this in our guides, but something that we may need to look out for going forward. And I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch out for. And we will be looking at an update to our environmental marketing code probably in the next 2 years, and we'll determine if an update to the environmental framework will be necessary. I think other developments that we are seeing is really, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of focus by regulators on the topic, and there'll probably be a lot more restrictions in terms of claims and maybe more prescriptive requirements that could be challenging to comply with. And so from an ICC perspective, we really do try and take into account the legal requirements, the legal background, but we are seeing a lot of focus on this particular topic, whether it's with the European Commission. And I think the FTC is probably looking at updating their guides this year, if I'm not mistaken. I think 2022 is they're up for the 10-year update to the guides.
We'll see. So we'll see.
We'll have to see how that evolves. But I know specifically in the EU, there is a lot of focus on green consumers and looking at putting together some directives in that respect that we'll need to consider and take into account. But I think our main aim is to make sure that the ICC guides are relevant and fit for purpose. And with this particular framework, we did try and put our stake in the ground to make sure that marketers have a tool that they can use to market responsibly, but also looking ahead to where some of these discussions are going, where some of these claims are starting to take a little bit more ground, but also to give a little bit more context, because I think we do share a number of examples in some of our training or presentations that marketers will probably need to be aware of, and to understand that context and language matters. And I think when marketers look at these claims, the terms that they use can make all the difference. You can't just say good for the planet or good for the environment. In that case, it might be better to say better for the environment and have something to substantiate that, but not just make a general claim. I think we've got numerous examples we can refer to, and we do hope that the guidance that we provided is something that people can use as a basis. And I think, as I've indicated, it is used quite widely by a number of countries, self-regulatory bodies. At the moment, we have the ICC code used in at least 42 countries globally as a basis for national codes. And so the frameworks that we develop under that, including the environmental framework, do form part of the national guidance that is used and adopted by bodies across the globe. And I'm very much hoping that ICC can continue to be a leading voice in that space, but certainly appreciate and welcome the contributions of the different organizations that we work with. I think within ICC, we have the privilege of having the possibility to draw from the expertise from our membership, and we work closely with organizations such as ICAS, the International Council of Advertising Self-Regulation, the European Advertising Standards Alliance, IAA, of course, the World Federation of Advertisers. We also have the Internet Advertising Bureau. And so with all the expertise from the different sectors, I think the guidance that we're able to put together really does reflect a global and concise view of the different issues that we try to address in our guidance. I hope that's helpful.
And I think that's a perfect wrap up as well. Hey, Raelene, thank you so much. This was so interesting. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about this. And we're definitely going to have to find a time next year to come back and talk more about the marketing code.
That would be fabulous. Thank you so much for having ICC on the program, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon on any other topics of interest.
All right, take care.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye for now.